Obtaining characters in RPGs is more often than not a baseline requirement for progression, not something to track as a matter of completion, since in most cases, you're just eventually going to get everyone anyway. Sure, there's the occasional hidden secret character, and this isn't even considering monster taming RPGs, which offer a completely different approach to party building. But for the most part, an RPG party is a predetermined entity. This is not, however, the case in Fire Emblem, and indeed, it's actually uncommon for one of these games to allow you to recruit every playable character at the same time. With Fortune's Weave coming up next year, raising questions about whether the 4 advertised leads are going to be all part of one developing army, or whether they instead represent a diverging route system like we've seen in the previous Fodlan games, it's little wonder that I got to thinking about this topic. Do any of the mainline Fire Emblem games let you recruit everyone? Right from the beginning, the series was setting us up to expect that we wouldn't be able to recruit everyone in one playthrough. Shadow Dragon introduced the concept of mutually exclusive recruits in the form of Aaron and Samson, who await you in 2 rival villages that will only allow you to visit one or the other before locking you out of the character you didn't pick. This style of gating recruitment persists through many of the classic games, whether that's picking your choice to fight Sonia or Dean in the Valentia games, or taking sides in a petty sibling rivalry in Genealogy. The idea got further expanded on in Thracia 776, which introduces branching routes and unique characters available on each path, and then carried through in a few different ways into both Binding Blade and Blazing Blade. And then there's Path of Radiance, which piles all of its exclusive recruits into its last 2 chapters. This has all culminated in the modern era with 2 games that prominently feature terminal routes that send the player down vastly different storylines. Birthright and Conquest from Fates are record-setting in the number of characters they lock the player out of in this tale of 2 warring nations. And even the supposed Golden Route Revelation makes 2 characters unobtainable and truncates the availability of 2 more for plot reasons. 3 Houses is overall less restrictive, although it is ultimately a story of 3 rival factions, so the house leaders and their most loyal allies will always stand in the way of the goal of full recruitment. Okay, that's all very obvious, but what about those games that don't have route splits or mutually exclusive recruits? Let's consider each of those one by one and see how well they measure up. Our first potential candidate is Mystery of the Emblem. Half of this game is just a remake of Shadow Dragon, and while it does cut a number of superfluous units, Book 1 of FE3 does preserve the choice between Aaron and Samson that kickstarted this aversion to full recruitment in the first place. Book 2, on the other hand, has no such choice, and in fact allows you to obtain every available unit. If we're counting this according to the characters you can get in a single save file, then since FE3 makes you choose a book at the start and treats them as separate entities, then Book 2 would seem to be a winner. But it's an awkward win, as there are a handful of characters who are playable in Book 1 but don't come back for the sequel. There's Hardin, for very obvious reasons, but then there's also all the axe units which got dropped from the roster because this was before the weapon triangle or intelligence systems being remotely fair to axe users. The DS remake New Mystery of the Emblem, on the other hand, escapes this little conundrum, since it's not in the same game as the DS Shadow Dragon. New Mystery papers over its predecessor's baffling decision to lock new characters behind the player killing off their own units, and includes in its gigantic roster, the largest of any game in the series, just about every character who was playable in any of the 3 previous Arcanea titles, as well as a handful of new additions on top of that. Just about the only thing holding FE12 back from having its full roster available all at once comes, oddly, from its DLC, which include maps adapted from the obscure BS Fire Emblem that feature characters otherwise unobtainable, like Boa and Garnef. Do we count this against FE12? Well, there is another issue that we're going to circle back around to later, but first let's look at some other games before we make that call. Radiant Dawn has been popping up in discussions of Fortune's Weave, specifically because it suggests an alternative to the split route system with a linear story that bounces back and forth between multiple armies. This unique structure contributes to FE10 having the second largest roster in the franchise, topping out at 73 once everything's said and done. 2 of those characters are locked to repeat playthroughs, but you can in fact still obtain them on top of everyone else. But then there's the Black Knight. This nigh unkillable powerhouse is usable for 3 chapters in the early and mid-game, and can even be customized to a limited degree in case you want to watch him one-shot stuff with a lance or something. After that, he helps you out for another chapter as an NPC, and then Ike kills him in the second endgame map. Needless to say, the Black Knight is the only one of the game's roster who cannot survive to the end credits no matter what you do. So close, but not quite. Alright then, but what about Awakening and Engage? Uniquely among modern Fire Emblem games, these 2 titles boast no branching routes or choices between characters who refuse to ally with each other. They're both linear stories, with no surprise character deaths or DLC exclusives or anything else that cut characters off from being part of one big roster. They never force the player to choose between one of 2 options. Except, wait, they kind of do. Fire Emblem avatars are an odd case, because while the 2 genders functionally occupy the same space in their respective stories, they are very much not created equally with regard to stuff like gender lock and support options. Awakening takes this further by giving Robin a gender-variable child, where just as with their parents, you can't have the male and female versions of Morgan at the same time. Supplementary material underscores this distinction further, most notably Heroes, which treats the 2 genders of the same avatar as separate characters, and even sometimes pairs them up as duo units when IS wants to be particularly lazy. With that in mind, and as someone who has gone through the considerable trouble to complete the support logs of every game which require you to treat the 2 avatars as distinct entities, I can say that Engage, and especially Awakening, fall just short of our goal here thanks to the weirdness surrounding Alear, Robin, and Morgan for that matter. Obviously, this entire spiel also applies to other games with avatars, including New Mystery, but we've already established that they've got bigger issues standing in the way of full recruitment. So what game does that leave us with? Are there any left? Well, it turns out there's one. If you've never played Sacred Stones, it might surprise you to even see it under consideration here. It hails from the classic era of Fire Emblem, and it even features a prominent route split in the choice between which of the 2 Renee siblings you want as your main lord. But oddly enough, 6 mutually exclusive mid-game chapters don't actually translate into exclusive recruits. Every character that can be obtained during this stretch shows up on both routes, although sometimes in different orders and circumstances. What's more, while FE8 has a set of bonus characters obtainable in its post-game creature campaign, all 10 of them can be recruited in a single save file, meaning the game's potential final roster of 43 can be fully realized. Even Orson being briefly playable and then dying as a boss is accounted for since he can be re-recruited during the creature campaign. That's right, Sacred Stones is the only Fire Emblem game where you can get the full roster in a single save file. No caveats or exceptions, just pure completionist satisfaction. Congratulations, FE8. By this incredibly narrow designation, you're the best game in the series. Now, is Fortune's Weave going to be able to match that achievement? Probably not, if only because the trailer is teasing the return of Byleth, and with them the eternal ambiguity of gender-variable avatars. But leaving that aside, it'll be very interesting to see whether the new game sticks to the Fodlan tradition of multiple routes, or if it opts for something else. Either way, be sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel if you're interested in seeing more Fire Emblem content. I've got plenty more planned as we await the release of Fortune's Weave next year. Au revoir.